All right, what's up, Twitch? What's up, YouTube? It's Thursday, and it is BrackCast number 63. Uh, came across this video about she's exposing the truth in Ukraine, and they don't like it. This was with Ava Bartlett, a redacted conversation, redacted one of these episodes. So I want to watch it. I want to react. Hopefully, we can all react to it together. We've talked about what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, and like, why is Putin after Ukraine? What was, the driving force behind his decision? And we have to understand too that the media and our news coverage is only going to feed us the propaganda that the West wants us to know. There are a lot more independent journalists going out there to hopefully find out really what's going on, like what's actually happening. So hopefully, I've been told this is something worth watching. We're gonna press play. It's pretty long. I don't know if we'll get through the whole thing, but hopefully we can get some information. Just gonna go live now on Instagram, and here we go. Deji, welcome again. Nice to see you as always. Let's go. Oh. See it?
Yep.
Welcome to Redacted Conversations. I'm Clayton Morris. On this show, we invite journalists, researchers, thought leaders on to discuss topics that are ignored or suppressed by the Western media. Today, we're joined by Ava Bartlett. She is a Canadian independent journalist who spent years on the ground covering conflict zones in the Middle East, especially in Syria, Palestine, where she lived for nearly 4 years. Ava is a recipient of the 2017 International Journalism Award for International Reporting. She's been covering the war in Ukraine, and today she joins us from Ukraine. Ava, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Why did you decide to go to Ukraine?
Well, to be clear, I'm actually in the Donetsk People's Republic, one of two autonomous republics formerly in eastern Ukraine. And I came back here to Donetsk because I had come here in 2019, and I had gone to areas north of Donetsk, north of a city called Gorlivka, which were on a daily basis and still continue to be on a daily and nightly basis being shelled by Ukrainian forces. In violation, by the way, of the Minsk Accords of, I think it was 2015. Ukraine has been using prohibited heavy weapons and shelling residential areas, literally terrorizing the civilians living there, driving them out of those villages. And not only that, but they've been, the Ukrainian forces have been bombing the cities themselves, including Donetsk, where I am now. So I came back here because this is a very much underreported issue. It's to my knowledge, it's not getting any reporting in mainstream media at all. And if there is any reference to these republics, it's usually in a negative light.
Do you remember this at all, Deji? Oh, you're muted.
No.
So, we did do, I don't know, I thought you were there. Maybe Tom was there too. But we did like a whole why Ukraine episode for BrackCast. And did you hear about Crimea?
No.
So Crimea is like this region, southern Ukraine, is fought over for a while. Now Putin is attacking Ukraine because of what's happening in eastern Ukraine. It's called the Donbass. She's in one of the areas of the Donbass, Donetsk. So it's Donetsk and Luhansk. They're both in the Donbass, which is eastern Ukraine. And before the war, for a stretch of about, I think, 8 years, from like 2010 to 2018, something like that, Ukraine has been bombing its Donbass, like that, its eastern part of the country. And they've been bombing it because what we hear in the Western media is that there's militant separatists in that region from Russia. So that's what we're told, that they're attacking that region because there are people who don't want to be part of Ukraine who live there, who are like terrorizing the area. So the news tells us that Ukraine, to try and get control of that area, to save their fellow Ukrainians, they started bombing that area. Okay. But apparently there was an agreement. I don't know why I just did this. There was an agreement between Russia and Ukraine that they would not do that. They would not fight over this region. So basically, a lot of eastern Ukraine has heavy ties with Russia, like family, ancestry. They speak Russian. So a lot of the people who live in that area are really tight with Russia. But apparently,
Oh yeah, I remember this. Yeah, yeah.
But
It's like a
apparently,
third.
yeah, a third of them speak Russian, and
Yeah.
and Ukraine apparently was not cool with that and started bombing them. But according to an agreement they made before, basically after the Cold War and after Crimea, they agreed that they would not do this. They would not fight for this area. So what we know in the West is Russia put some militant separatists in there to cause havoc, but she's finding out the truth of this area, what's going on over there.
Okay.
So there's a summary for those who don't know.
Light and totally dismissing the a modest estimate is 13,000 who've been killed in Ukraine's war in the Donbass in the last 8 years. So
8 years.
I came back here to do what I can, to shed some light on this issue.
When you say that largely,
So it was 2013 to 2021.
Yeah.
if it is reported, it's negative reporting or negative coverage. What do you mean by that? What have you seen where you've just shaken your head?
So, for example, if the republics are referred to, they're usually called pro-Russian separatist republics. And while that is true, people here are ethnically Russian, so hence they are pro-Russian. It does have a negative connotation in Western media and to a Western audience, where everything to do with Russia has been demonized for years and years. So instead of referring to these people as formerly Ukrainians, formerly part of Ukraine, and instead of actually for example, giving any context as to why they chose to be autonomous, none of that context is given. They're simply dismissed as pro-Russian separatist. So, and it is the same, by the way, with how Western media treated Syria. They either, again, don't report on issues, or they distort the way they report so that the Western audience is not given the information that's needed for them to fully understand what's really happening on the ground here.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned sleep deprived. I mean, we can only imagine, from afar, watching a war correspondent and what that looks like and what that entails. Just in the past 24 hours, what has been your experience in this coverage? How much sleep do you get? What are you seeing on a daily basis?
Well, no, I don't want to be dramatic. I am in Donetsk. I was in Mariupol on the 24th, 25th, I think it was. I might be wrong about those dates. And I hopefully we'll get into this, I was also west of Mariupol, where Western media was claiming there's a mass grave. Now, this was some days ago. The night before last, around, I think it was 11 p.m., I went with two other journalists to a district west, it's in Donetsk, but on the west side of Donetsk, that was...
Yo, do you hear about that news too, Deji? You're muted. Sorry.
No, what happened?
So she just mentioned really briefly that there was a report about a mass grave.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember hearing this in the news. I hope I get this right from what I remember hearing. But Ukraine was digging up, like Ukraine's forces were digging up these areas in eastern Ukraine and found a bunch of graves. I'm going to double check this right now. Mass graves, Ukraine. Okay. Mass grave sites discovered in Ukraine. Civilian death toll. Okay, so it was supposed to be like Russia attacked and all these civilians died. All these civilians were casualties from the war. And they discovered this graves during the war.
Okay.
Okay, so the propaganda there is how bad for Russia to come in and like kill all these civilians.
Yeah.
Pretty sure it was. Okay, hold on.
But basically, that wasn't the case.
The new graves were first being established near the Manor Cemetery over the past several weeks, April 1 to 15th. Additional trenches have been excavated. But I think what she's going to allude to here is they're not new. Like, these aren't from the war. You know what I mean? So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what she says.
Being shelled. It had been shelled, I think, 2 hours prior. It was like 100 grad missiles, according to reports I've seen, were shelling this residential area. I believe one person was killed. By the time we got there, the fires were out, but there was a small, like a mini mart that was destroyed. We went to a residential building behind which a shell had hit a school. We spoke with locals there, and they said this is normal. You know, this is what we've been enduring for the last 8 years. So that was 2 nights ago. 3 days ago, I think it was, I went to a market area also in the west of Donetsk that was shelled around, I think it was 11:40 in the morning, prime time for when the market would be crowded with people. 5 civilians were killed and over 20 were injured. And this is, again, shelling by Ukrainian forces. So those are the kind of things I've been seeing in the last number of days.
Okay.
Unbelievable. So Ukraine
is shelling them. And they said there's nothing new there. It's been happening. But mass grave sites discovered in Ukraine are grim signs of civilian death toll. But they make it out to be like it's from the war. So yeah, okay.
Ukrainian forces doing the shelling. I want to get into some of the distinctions here about who in the Ukrainian forces are doing this. The Azov Battalion is something the Western media did cover prior to this invasion. In fact, the United States Congress covered it and demanded that we stop sending money to the Azov Battalion because they are neo-Nazis. Interesting, right? But now the Western media...
You know about that too, right? The whole neo-Nazi thing?
Azov? No.
Well, there's supposed to be like a group of Puritan kind of Ukrainians that want to kill off all Russians. Like any Russian-speaking people in Ukraine or any Russian like ancestry, they want to commit genocide and kill all of them.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Seems to want to pretend that they do not exist. How big a part do you think they are playing in this conflict? And should Westerners be aware of it, since their tax dollars may be going to arm these individuals?
Thank you very much for highlighting that. They're playing a major part. I mean, if people are watching reports coming out of, for example, places like Mariupol, there's Patrick Lancaster on the ground reporting in English language. There's Murad Gazdiev reporting in English for RT. And there's a number of other reports coming out of there from primarily Russian journalists and also Donetsk journalists. They would be aware that the Azov were responsible for point-blank executions of civilians, Mariupol civilians, not just Mariupol, everywhere, but I'm speaking right now about Mariupol. Also of occupying, they've embedded with Ukrainian forces. So together, they've occupied residential buildings, again, referring to Mariupol. And so when you see all this footage that Western media is putting out of destruction, yes, there is destruction in Mariupol, but they're not giving the context as to why. So that context is these Nazis with Ukrainian forces have been occupying these residential buildings, militarizing them, shooting on Russian and DPR forces, and then getting fire back. And that's where you see the destruction. So yeah, Westerners should be alarmed that their tax money is going to fund Nazis, not only Americans, but Canadians as well. I believe Canada has funded Ukrainian forces, and thereby the weapons and the money has also gone to Nazis. I think it's $1 billion. I might be wrong about that number, but it's a huge amount.
The West is told that we must support Ukraine and send weapons and money. In fact, Nancy Pelosi making a sudden appearance there to meet with Vladimir Zelensky. And we need to push back against war crimes by Russia. That is the narrative that's playing out in the United States. One war crime story that was plastered all over Western media.
What's up?
So, we're getting nuked, yo.
I hope not, dude.
As the story you mentioned a moment ago, the mass graves in Mariupol. The story is, of course, that Russian soldiers killed 9,000 to 10,000 people, buried them in unmarked graves. You went to this area. You saw it firsthand. What did
Yeah.
you learn when you were there?
Yeah, and I'd like to add to the story. So you're right; they've said up to 9 or 10,000 people buried secretly by Russian forces to cover their war crimes. I am emphasizing, of course, the ridiculous quotations, and they've been citing the former mayor of Mariupol, who I have no idea where he is. He's certainly not in Mariupol, as saying this is the worst war crime of the 21st century. And anybody who's been following America's war crimes around the world should be appalled at this claim. And he also made a reference to a World War II crime of 33,000, I think the number was, Jews killed by Nazis. So as I noted in my article that came out on RT recently, this is ludicrous, and it's huge. It's appalling at so many levels because, number one, this mayor almost certainly is whitewashing the Nazis in his former city and in Ukraine, and number two, to compare this, what they are calling a mass grave, to the extermination of 33,000 people in World War II is an abominable lie. What I saw was an existing cemetery, which Western media have noted is there. But then I saw rows of newly dug graves. Now, I don't know when they were dug. I don't know when the people that are buried there, I don't know how they were killed. But I do know at most there were 400 of these new graves. By the way, almost 100 of which were empty. And then amongst these graves were on the graves there were placards when the name was known and date of birth was put, and if the information wasn't available, then they just had numbers. But the interesting thing was, while I was there I was with the RT journalist and his two cameramen, and while I was there, the two men responsible for digging the graves arrived. And we spoke with them. Of course, I don't speak Russian. I'm very clear about that. So my colleague, Roman Kosterov, spoke with them, and I recorded. And they said they were responsible. They knew every person that was buried there. They specifically stated every person was buried in a separate grave with dignity, in the most dignified manner possible, in a coffin. And they even said Ukrainian soldiers were buried there. They're humans as well. My colleague Roman asked them, are you aware of Western allegations? And they said they were really offended by it. And they said that's absolutely a lie. And they again emphasized each person was buried in a coffin in a separate grave. So now, when you say mass grave, I think most people imagine a pit. Well, in fact, that's what this former mayor, the runaway mayor of Mariupol, said. He specifically said a pit of, I think, 30 meters wide and bodies thrown into the pit is what he said. And, that's not what I was told. And that's not what I saw.
Yeah,
Okay. So these are still civilians of war. Some of them new from the war, I suppose, because she just said there was a bunch of new ones, and many existing graves already. It was already an existing cemetery. So maybe these are further civilians. Maybe some of them died from Russian forces. Maybe some of them died from Ukrainian Azov forces or whatever they are. I'm just trying to figure out who's burying them. Are the Russians burying them? Or are the Ukrainians burying them? It sounds like because it's out of respect. And she even said we're even burying the Ukrainian forces because they're humans too. So it sounds like Russians are doing these graves. The Russians are digging up these graves out of respect for all civilians and both side forces.
Yeah.
But how they die, we don't know. We don't know yet if they're dying from Russian military attacks or from the Donbass, attacks over the past 8 years from Ukraine, from Kiev and stuff. So let's see.
When I think of a mass grave, I think of World War II, images of World War II, where Jews are just thrown into a pit, nameless and covered up by the Nazis. That's what I think of mass graves, and that's not at all what you experienced.
No. And the other point to note is Mariupol is predominantly ethnic Russian. So just logically, why would the Russian army and the DPR forces go out of their way to exterminate Russians? It doesn't make sense.
I will ask you flat out, are you witnessing war crimes by Russians? This is something we've heard, again, the Mariupol story, but in general, have you seen war crimes committed by Russian soldiers?
Well, I have not, but I will also be very clear. I am in the Donetsk People's Republic. I'm not in Ukraine, so I cannot witness what is happening there. But now I would reference Scott Ritter, who was a former U.S. Army. He might have been Marine. I might be wrong about that.
Yes,
but anyway,
he's a Marine. Yeah.
Yeah, and he and other analysts have been emphasizing actually Russia's strategy in their what they call a military operation to denazify Ukraine. They've been emphasizing it's actually been. I don't want to use the word moderate. What's the word I want to use? Anyway, they've been saying like it's strategic. It hasn't been what we saw America do in Iraq, just flat out demolition of everything and killing of massive amounts of civilians and demolishing of the infrastructure. It's been strategic on military targets, and it's been slow in the sense, not slow. I don't want to say that wrong, but it hasn't been like if Russia wanted to, they could have done a whole lot of destruction in Ukraine. But
well, I've heard it said, and maybe you can
strategically. And also another point is, and I'm not a military expert or an analyst, so I don't want to mislead people. But from what I've heard and what I've been reading and watching, they've been using a technique where they don't fully surround an area, but they surround it enough to prevent the flow of weapons and etc. to force the Ukrainian military and the Nazis with them out of these areas. And that's quite different than just completely destroying a city like, for example, America did in Syria when they destroyed Raqqa, completely destroyed, killed maybe thousands of civilians.
Yeah,
that's
like
not what Russia is doing.
They're like raising.
So in fairness, I'll have to ask you then flat out, are you witnessing war crimes committed by Ukrainian forces?
Yes. I am. I mean, I won't say that I was a direct witness to the moment that it happened, but again, as I mentioned, 3 days ago, I think it was, I went to this market area that was hit by Ukrainian fired grad missiles, again, killing 5 civilians in the prime of the day when most people would be at the market. While I was there taking photos and video footage, I met a man who's like with a safety counselor or committee or something with the market. And he was saying, this has been happening every day and Ukrainians know that they're firing at a market. There's no military target here. And I looked around and it was indeed a large.
Okay, do you know what exactly war crimes are?
I mean, I guess anything including murder, anything, I guess that would include inhuman treatment of like civilians and soldiers, really.
Wow, good job, man. Like, I just Googled it. So, for those who may not know, war crimes are violations of the laws or customs of war. So, willful killing, torture or inhuman treatment, including biological experiments, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, extensive destruction and appropriation of property, not justified by military necessity, and carried out unlawfully and wantonly. So yeah, that's what she's saying. It is not an area of interest. It is a public market,
Damn.
So
That's fucking wild, yo.
Ukraine apparently is attacking that area. And maybe the mask of this war is to try to push blame on Russian attacks. But really, it's Ukraine continuing what they've been doing for the last 8 years. So, oh boy, this is heavy.
Market surrounded by residential buildings, no military target, and it was not the first time it has been targeted. So that is a war crime. Deliberately targeting a crowded public area is a war crime, and that's what Ukraine has been doing for 8 years. And all these people talking about Russia's war have been ignoring the fact that Ukraine has been warring upon the Donbass republics for 8 years.
Right. Yes, that is something that's being ignored. Patrick Lancaster has also arrived on the scene in moments where shelling has occurred in broad daylight in the middle of civilian areas, no military targets, no military equipment. There really no strategic advantage from what I can gather from some of these attacks.
No, in fact, March 14th, I believe it was, maybe 3 blocks from where I currently am, so in the center of Donetsk, Ukraine fired a Tuchka-U missile, and it had cluster munitions, and it killed 21 people and injured nearly 40, and so again, firing in I think it was around noon. I might be wrong about the time, but anyway, the point being, firing on the city in the heart of the city. during daytime, knowing it would kill many civilians. That's another war crime. That's not the first time. You know, when I came here in 2019 and went to Gorlivka, that city north of Donetsk was heavily hit in, I believe it was 2014 or 2016. Heavily hit and like many civilians killed, many children killed. And there's no military objective. It's completely it's terrorizing the population. And actually the interesting thing, like when I talked with people, and I don't want to say that this is every single person here, but the people that I did speak with, both civilian and also in the DPR military, they said, you know, initially, we didn't necessarily need autonomy. We didn't want what was happening in Kiev and the massacre in Odessa to come to us. You know, they were aware of the Nazis in Ukraine and what they were capable of. But also they're ethnic Russians. They wanted to be able to speak their language, you know, and they also didn't want what Kiev has been doing, the rewriting of history, wherein Nazis are now glorified and the Soviet army that liberated these areas from Nazis are now vilified. They didn't obviously want that because, you know, this is their history. And that's what Ukraine has been doing. So they said, like, initially we just wanted to be away from that. And then because of that crime of not wanting to be a part of what Kiev was doing, the Kiev regime started shelling them and has been for 8 years.
You have been writing about, you've been showing Ukrainians that welcome a Russian presence once they arrive. Can you explain that side of the story to our audience?
Basically, if you're a Ukrainian citizen and you don't agree with the government, you can be imprisoned, you can be assassinated, you can be tortured. If you're a journalist, particularly, and there are a long list of journalists that have been imprisoned, tortured, and assassinated by the Ukrainian secret services or intelligence services, whatever, or by the Nazis themselves. So if you're somebody who is critical of what the Zelensky government is doing, and you speak out about it, then you risk being killed. So there's that aspect of living, you know, under that rule all the time, and that the terror of thinking any moment you could be killed by.
I mean, she's saying some crazy stuff, right? And you're gonna hear, or anyone's gonna watch this. I'm curious to see like some of the comments after too. Like, I think a lot of people are gonna call her a liar. You know,
Of course.
naturally you're gonna get a bunch of people be like, she's making this stuff up. She's been hired by who? Blah 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 blah. And I just want to say too, she's not the only person reporting on this. She's the first Canadian that I've heard about doing this, but there was someone from Paris, from France, who's been doing this as well, who's been reporting on Donbass and these attacks for the last 8 years too. So she's not the only independent reporter. There's other countries that are doing this too. So
the government or by the Nazis. But also there's a great deal of corruption. Okay, every country has corruption, but you know, the Russian forces, contrary to how the Western media is portraying them, when they come, they're delivering humanitarian aid, and they're if there's destruction, they're helping to rehabilitate the area. So what I saw, for example, I came with a media delegation here end of March 24th, I think. And we were here for 2 days, and we went to an area that had been liberated by DPR and Russian forces a couple of weeks prior, Volnovakha. There was a lot of destruction, but Russians were handing out the humanitarian aid, and slowly but surely life was returning to that area. But, you know, when Western media reported on that, they reported on the destruction of a hospital there, but they didn't report that the Ukrainian forces had occupied the hospital, had militarized it, and had mined the intensive care unit before leaving. So there's a whole lot of context that's missing, that people, you know, wouldn't understand why normal civilians would welcome Russian forces. They welcome them because it's the start of a return to peace and stability. And it's, by the way, it's the same thing we saw in Syria. Western media wasn't reporting honestly on what they dubbed rebels, which were actually Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. And they weren't reporting on, you know, like areas like Eastern Ghouta or Eastern Aleppo that were occupied by these forces, that the people there were, again, the same thing. It's the same scenario. They were starved, they were tortured, they were imprisoned, they were executed by these terrorists that the Western media was whitewashing and lauding as valiant rebels. And it's the same scenario now in Ukraine.
Well, if you dig into this United...
do you have a comment, dude?
No, I'm just playing it out loud. I'm gonna grab my charger.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, this explains a lot more of like a lot of what people were asking me because I did that first initial research about what's going on, and I think I got some of it backwards, but um, it was one of the reasons why I was wondering, like, if the intention of Putin, if Russia's intention was to claim and save the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, I was wondering, like, so why are they attacking Kiev? Why are they attacking further into the region if all what they want to reclaim is the Donbass? So this kind of starts to make a little bit more sense with that question, because the attacks aren't coming from the Donbass. It's not some like civil war happening inside the Donbass where you have forces from both sides, and it's not a matter of just Putin coming in and helping the Russians or the pro-Russians, I guess, or the the Russian-speaking Ukrainians, like civilians. They're being shelled from somewhere else. Like Ukraine forces, I don't know if it's from Kiev or whatever, are the ones actually attacking those areas. So Russia's coming in, helping out those civilians, and potentially moving forward and attacking, planned strategic military targets that aren't considered war crimes. So, all right. Like, yeah, she's going to get lots of hate. I'm worried about her, but I mean, she's already in the heart of it. So she,
State Department's website and you look at known human rights abusers, terrorist organizations, the SBU is listed by the U.S. State Department on their website. We just did a whole video on this. And so known war crimes, making people disappear. I mean, it's listed right on the United States Department's website. They will disappear individuals. They will be held against their will. We covered the story of the SBU grabbing Gonzalo Lira, who was a Chilean blogger, journalist living in that area as well, and had been rounded up by the SBU and held against his will for about 7 days. Then he was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement after he was released. Are you hearing similar stories to that?
Well, I mean, I definitely did. Years prior, I was writing about a Ukrainian journalist, Kirill Vyshinsky, who was at the time of his imprisonment, he was chief editor of RA Novosti, Ukraine. And he was in prison. I forget the time now because this has been a few years, but it was over a year. I can't remember if it was a year and a half. But anyway, let's say over a year. He was imprisoned for his crime. He was accused of treason. He was never given a trial, by the way. He was imprisoned and tortured for his crime of having published 14 or 15 articles in 2014. And the articles were on what was happening in 2014, around the time of the coup. And the articles were of differing opinions. It wasn't just solely anti-Kiev or pro-Kiev, it was differing opinions. And none of them were written by Kirill Vyshinsky. He was an editor. He published them, and they all had like the caveat at the bottom. This is not written by. I don't know what the caveat was, but anyway, it was clear he didn't write them. He was in prison 4 years after the fact. So like, just for all these people that are thinking, Ukraine is a democracy, it's not. This is a journalist imprisoned for publishing articles he did not write, and he was tortured for it. So I mean. And I remember I met him and interviewed him, and he was pretty humble and like didn't go into details about the torture, but he did mention colleagues of his who were killed by Ukraine.
I can't imagine this video. Okay, so this video came out May 1st, 2022. It's got 855,000 views already and 49,000 likes. How is this still on YouTube?
Yeah.
I can't imagine it would stay. Like, Redacted is, I mean, they have 796,000 subscribers. So they've got a strong following of reporting. Like this guy, I guess this guy is like one of the main hosts. I've never seen one before, but anyway.
for similar reasons, persecution of people that either were outspoken dissidents or in his case, he simply published other people's work. So yeah, it's not uncommon. And in fact, I remember when I was writing about him, researching, there's a website called Stalker Zone. It has quite a lot of good information on Ukraine's crimes. And researching, there were activists. There were people that, for example, drove pensioners from Donbass to wherever they went to get their pensions, and they were imprisoned. Or somebody who donated money to Donbass, and he's imprisoned. It's like anybody who shows sympathies for the Donbass republics faces imprisonment, execution, or worse. I'm on a kill list, by the way. I don't know when I was put on there.
Imagine,
I don't know what my crime was.
Yeah.
Was it going to Crimea and interviewing people and finding out they actually liked being a part of Russia and they actually described themselves as Russian? Or was it coming here to the Donbass and interviewing civilians?
It's got to be that. It's got to be the
shining a tiny light on the terror that they're enduring. I don't know, but what I do know is if I were to set foot in Ukraine proper, I would be killed.
She'd disappear.
Almost certainly.
She'd be disappeared.
How did you become aware of the fact that you were on this kill list, and who is operating this kill list?
I forget the name of the person who's operating it. I wrote an article about it, but Zelensky's aware of it. And because when I wrote that article, I remember finding some quote. I think the quote was from the Russian website TASS. But anyway, Zelensky basically, if I remember correctly, defended the existence of the list, like saying we can't take this website down because that would be, ironically, interfering with freedom of speech. This from the government that imprisons and kills journalists.
Freedom of speech.
But yeah, I was told that I was on the list by a friend, and then I found they don't have a whole lot of information about me. But the thing about this list is, if they do get your passport, if they do get your address, your telephone number, they'll publish it. And then they'll let the thugs, the Nazis, do the dirty work, or maybe the intelligence. I don't know who's always responsible for the assassinations, but there was a Ukrainian journalist. His name's Oliz. I forget his name.
And the way she's talking, man, she's like cold. She's like, it's like, it's part of my job, Like she's not even like scared, or maybe she is. Maybe she's been exposed to this for such a long time now, or it's just like, Desensitized, yeah, that's the term. Like, she just seems like robotic,
Yeah.
His last name, Buzain or something like that. All his information was put on the list, and at some point afterwards, he was killed.
Unbelievable. Or not unbelievable if you've been following this story. The West seems to want to shut down anything that shows Russia or Russian presence in any other, as anything other than a negative light. That's what they want to shut down. So talking about this would make you and me Russian sympathizers or Putin supporters. So how do you handle that?
Dude, there's like a bunch of YouTube stuff I've been getting that it's like, if there's anything that I do to dismiss the war, or if I'm like, I don't know, anything where it shows that I am sympathizing with the Russian side, dude, like, demonetize. YouTube cannot support. They don't want any kind of like advertisement on those kinds of videos. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to monetize this one. I'll set it, but I bet you right away it's gonna be denied. I'll let you know.
Really? Interesting.
Because this is clearly against Western propaganda. So, man.
Criticism.
I was warned. They're like, yo, be careful. Be careful. Like, I could be targeted. But I'm like, I'm just on YouTube reacting to something that's already on YouTube, like.
When someone just publishes a comment on a YouTube video and just says, you're obviously a puppet of Putin. How do you handle that kind of criticism?
Yeah,
It's really tiring and annoying, but it's something I've gotten for years because I was going to Syria and I was reporting, not even that much about the president. If I said anything about the president of Syria, I would say he has overwhelming support by the Syrian people. When I say overwhelming, I mean like 70%, 80%. I can't give an actual number, but everyone I meet when I go to Syria loves the man. So that's kind of the most I would say about him. Most of my reporting was on the people. I would go and interview people, whether in Aleppo or Ghouta or wherever. And for the crime of giving them a voice, I was called all the names you mentioned and a whole lot more. And it doesn't change what I'm saying. And I always maintain, like, okay, I write opinion articles for RT, roughly one a month. So that's not a lot of money. So people will say, well, you're just on the Kremlin payroll. Okay, I do receive money from RT, which is a Russian source, but it's not enough to pay the rent. It's certainly not enough to live a lavish life. The point is, like, they're trying to. It's like calling someone a conspiracy theorist. They're trying to shut you up. They're trying to make you afraid. Oh no, I'm being.
So, dude, I was asking this question too. These people who go out and seek the truth, put their lives in danger, they're not getting heavily rewarded for it.
No,
They're
probably
they're
not.
just basically risking their lives to seek truth and to like broadcast truth. Like, what's your opinion on that? Here I am,
It's
like,
like a
on a
certain
daily
amount.
basis, I avoid watching the news because it's depressing, you know? I know that what we eat, what we consume here in terms of our news and media is heavily biased, huge propaganda, and it's gotten to the point where it's like, man, I don't even want to know the news. I don't even check any news outlets or social media for news. My news is like when one of you guys or True Brack or um, my family would be like, "Hey, did you hear what happened?" And then
Mm.
once I get a headline, I fact check a little bit, or I do a little bit of research about, like, is it real or not. But in the most part, it's like, man, if it doesn't, if it's like, if it's nothing I have any control over or any like influence over, I kind of just like, I move on. So yeah, what do you think? Valiant? Like, foolish? What do you what do you,
Um, I don't know. I think the news, man. The news is such a like. I generally don't check for news outlets anymore.
yeah,
Like I will get my news from articles mostly now. Like I'll go on Twitter and I'll get like notification on there because they have like a central page where it's like news, sports, fashion, entertainment, whatever. So I'll like maybe see something on there that is like popular in the news cycle. But generally, like it's only when I'm at my parents that I'll like watch the
talk
news.
about news. Yeah,
I just think it's so it is so negative. There's no good news
yeah.
on CNN or Fox, and now as I'm getting older, you start to see all the little biases on the stations and realizing like the network too is like in league with like this side of the political fence, and it's just like
Like,
just tell me the truth, man.
my
And like
parents.
those,
Yeah,
sorry, like, and to get back to the earlier point, those people that like really do it to just like chase the story, those people, it takes a certain type of person to do that, and they often are not like rewarded monetarily. Like you often find those are the people that like are have like financial ruin because they like put all of their passion and energy into like finding the truth even at the cost of their own safety and sanity and shit.
yeah.
So
This and okay, her
exactly.
Ava, right? She You look at influencers, you look at YouTube content creators, Instagram, whatever, all those personalities, the TV personalities. Immediately when you listen to her speak, she doesn't give that off. She doesn't give off like this sense of like, hey, I want to influence you, or like, hey,
Yeah,
I want to control you. She gives off a little bit of this sense of like, I just want you guys to know what I know. Like, this is
yeah,
what I found, and I want you guys to know. And it's very
yeah,
like factual. I don't really sense a lot of emotion behind it too. It's almost, like I said,
yeah.
cold robotic.
Data,
Yeah, it's just
data.
spitting out. She's got dates or whatever. She's not incredibly precise about her dates or like lengths, durations of time or whatever like that. But you could tell it's like recorded in her, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. As we were talking about the news, my parents, they like when they're not watching like an episode of something, it's just like CP24 is on their TV the whole time, and CP24 like repeats itself every 10-15 minutes.
yeah.
It's the same coverage all day unless something new comes. I feel like, and you're right, there's no good news. The only time I remember where a lot of the news outlets talk about positive stuff is the Olympics. When it's some world stage of some sporting event, yeah, you got some good news to talk about there.
World Cup.
Yeah, like, oh, Canadians podium, they're top or gold or silver or whatever. We were always so happy about it. Or yeah, sports, World Cup, now, you know, Stanley Cup, NHL playoffs, whatever. But yeah, there's no like actual just like, hey, look at what this awesome thing happened. They'll have like maybe one or two stories out of like the 10 that could be somewhat positive or heartwarming or something like that. That's why we have to rely on Instagram and seeing all those like positive posts on Instagram. Anyway, it's admirable for sure. Like, you know, you worry about them. She talked about that Ukrainian one that got arrested. The publisher didn't even write the articles, gets like executed and tortured just for publishing it. Like, that's scary, man. That's not freedom of speech, right? Like, they're just sharing. Yeah. Oh my god. Anyway,
being called this, I better not
more depression.
say what I'm saying. I don't care. Call me what you want, because for me, the important thing is telling the truth as much as I can. I might be imperfect. I might say things wrong sometimes, but I'm telling the truth when I say these things from here or from Syria, wherever I'm reporting. So yeah, back to the whole, like, the names that you will be called. And I've
also, dude, honestly, I know the terms Syria, Iraq, Al Qaeda, Bin Laden, all that stuff. I don't really know what the story was behind all that. Do you? Like, I don't
Not
know.
really.
I can't say that like I know what happened there. Like, it was going on while I don't even remember. Was I in school? And so I was just like focused on my life, you know. This war is like, we were still coming out of COVID. We still had a lot of like home time, so and we have the podcast. The podcast is really the reason why I started to research about this, because I wanted to talk about it. So I did some, you know, background checks and stuff like that. But yeah, I can't say I can begin to know about, you know, the whole war on terrorism and what happened in Iraq and Syria and all that stuff, Taliban and all that. That's bad on me. I guess I should have been more aware of that. I was trying to explain that, like, for the average person, when we
It's all good.
consume, huh?
I was gonna say it's all good. You were living your life.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying, like, the average person consumes news. So we open a newspaper, we open our social media, or we go to like whatever, New York Times, Toronto Star, whatever it is. We go to the website and we read headlines. Catchy headlines makes us click something and read it some more. And that's usually how an average person consumes news. They go to their news outlet, they consume it, they eat it up, and they go on with their day. Occasionally, you'll have a smaller group of people who are loud and obnoxious, who are opinionated. And those are the people who comment on Facebook posts, who like publish and share Facebook posts, and then they comment and they have like all these fights on the comments section. You have a small group of people who are the loudest, and then they start all the bias and all the hate back and forth, where then they really push the propaganda. But I think for the average consumer, they're just going to read something and then go on with their day. So there's no truth seeking at all. We trust our source to be like, all right, this is what, you know, Toronto Star told me. I'm going to say that it's real, it's true. And then you have a conversation with your friend about it later, or your coworker, and you're like, yo, man, did you hear about this news? They talk. And then it spreads. And then that's how you get like the Western view, you know?
Yeah.
And it's right now in this war, if you are not in Russia, you have the Western view. Well, maybe China. Maybe China has the Russian view too. But anyone outside of Russia, Europe, North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Australia, they all have the Western view right now, right? And it's
That's
like
crazy to think about it.
Yeah.
Like, just the amount of like deceit, really, and deception.
And then we just eat it up because that's the only thing we're fed, you know?
Yeah.
Unless you go out of your way to like, hey, what's the other side? And again, it's not readily available. She said, you're not going to find this in mainstream media. You're not going to know all this stuff. Anyway.
been called over and over again. they don't really attack what you have to say. They don't attack the content. They just call you a name, and that does work for some people. Just like if you're critical of Israel, someone will call you anti-Semitic, and you're like, no, actually, I'm critical of these policies. I'm critical of the wars. I'm critical of Israel's targeting of Palestinians. That doesn't make you anti-Semitic, but by calling someone that, they're afraid their reputation will be tarnished or something. So that's the whole point of these names.
Yeah, and they should.
Okay, you know what?
You make them radioactive.
Yeah, it adds.
So
It's like these terms are just shot out by some random loud commenter in an attempt to disqualify this person. It's like automatically you are not valid. You are this. I don't have to listen to you anymore, right? Yeah. Transphobic. That's that. Yeah, we talked about that with automatically we're against trans space in sports. Transphobic. It's like no, like anyway. Guys, I mean, we watched 26 minutes already of this 45-minute documentary. I'm going to finish watching this on my own, guys, but it's past midnight now. We're going to wrap this up for this week. I'm going to have the link in the description. Guys, I urge you, if you're going to watch this VOD later, if you're in the viewers right now, like, watch the rest. And if you have time and you're available and you are kind of more on the opinionated side of this war, take the time to see what the other side is reporting. I think it's there's three sides to a story. You get the one side, and then you get the other side, and then there's the truth. So it's like she's gonna say it's the truth, but some people are gonna say it's just their side of the story. It's biased too, and all like that. So anyway, thanks for joining us this week. Deji, do you have anything else you want to say?
Yo, man. No war, more peace, man. Fuck war, bro.
Yeah. At the end of the day, man, I know this is for money. If no matter what anybody tells me, this is a little bit of my like tunnel vision, whether it's the Russia side or the U.S. side. U.S. propaganda with Syria and then NATO and trying to push Ukraine, all that stuff. Ultimate underlying thing: greed and money. Putin trying to say going into Ukraine, save Donbass, save his people. He was forced into a corner because the U.S. gave him no other choice but to retaliate. Sure, I'm gonna give it like with knowing these kind of these facts. Yes, this follows on to that narrative, but at the same time, making a military push on any country or any space that's going to put civilians in danger, I'm just always gonna be like, I'm not cool with that. And I know that any kind of political move is always for profit. It's always for some sort of gain in power, money, or strategic advantage, military advantage. So that's the sad part about war. I wish the world wouldn't have to be still fighting for territory or still fighting for like natural resource advantages or anything like that. I wish, yeah, we could just be like, all right, we're all cool. We're all on Earth, We don't have to be Canadians, Americans, Russians, Ukrainians, Europeans. We're just Earthlings, humans, whatever it is. World peace.
If we start fighting for water, then it's just gonna get really interesting down here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think climate change will become more and more of a danger in the next, 10 years. And unless people start to really work together on that, we're not going to come together. We're not going to come together on any other issue. World hunger, nobody really cares enough to solve world hunger. World peace, again, it's just more so like whatever makes us more money. Economical warfare, bio and economic warfare, I think is like the big thing. I really don't understand why there's still military warfare these days. USA is scared. Straight up, I'm going to say USA is afraid because China is a growing power, world power. Russia's always been a growing world power. And if you got China and Russia next to each other, US doesn't like that. So US is trying to build up all these NATO or whatever to try and keep their like military brute strength. And I don't think it's going to last, dude. I don't think it's going to last. Anyway, that's just me spewing out a bunch of opinions. Thanks, Deji. I'll see you next week. Hopefully, unless I'm working. But it was good. Have a great weekend, guys. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Peace.